Welcome back to A Powerless Mage Presents The Deep Dive. If you're one of the millions of people who feel, well, trapped in a cycle of self-doubt or just this constant frustration with where you are, then you are absolutely ready for this. Today, we're not just talking about some abstract philosophy. We're really getting into the nuts and bolts of your emotional and, well, your mental life, trust and loss.
Yeah, and these aren't ideas that just pop up during a crisis. They are like the gears constantly grinding underneath our daily expectations, our anxieties, everything.
We've been looking at some source material that really challenges the comfortable ideas we have, the often damaging assumptions we carry about how the world should work. So our mission, our whole goal for this deep dive is to try and convince you of something, to persuade you that embracing reality, the messy, uncertain parts that we spend so much energy trying to deny, is actually the shortcut.
The most direct path to getting control and finding some genuine lasting peace.
Exactly. So we're really setting out to answer one core question today. Why do we demand trust from our partners, from our jobs, from everything, when what we really crave is something impossible, which is certainty?
And how does that impossible demand make us completely terrified of the inevitable reality of loss? That is the essential insight we're going after. The material we're diving into really asked for complete redefinition of these terms, especially for anyone feeling stuck or overwhelmed.
The energy we waste fighting reality.
Right.
Fighting the fact that life is uncertain.
It's the biggest waste of our resources. It really is. Once you understand the difference between demanding certainty and just accepting uncertainty, that's the first step. It's the key to taking back control of your emotions and, just as important, your energy.
Okay, let's unpack this. And we're going to start by looking at what we truly value when we talk about reliability. We'll begin with a really powerful hypothetical situation, one that forces us to actually put a price tag on certainty. So I want you to really picture this scenario. Think about a relationship in your life right now. It could be, a difficult client, a new employee you're a bit worried about, maybe even a friend who's been flaky lately.
Someone you've been agonizing over.
Exactly. You're losing sleep, running these little risk scenarios in your head, trying to predict how they might let you down. The whole process it's exhausting. Now imagine a stranger walks up to you, someone who seems to have this supernatural knowledge. They point to this person you're worried about and they say, I know everything about their future actions. For a price, I can give you a 100% guaranteed answer. They're either totally trustworthy for this specific task or they're guaranteed to fail. No gray area, no surprises.
Absolute security.
Absolute security.
Yeah.
And the price.
Yeah.
Well, it could be a lot of money, or it could be some other meaningful sacrifice. The real question is, what are you willing to pay? Because your answer tells you everything about how you see the world.
It really does, because if that doubt, that constant worry has been eating up your mental energy,
right,
then that price, even if it's high, might suddenly seem completely worth it. You're not just buying an answer, you're buying an end to the worry. You're buying back all that mental space you're using to hedge your bets. You're buying peace of mind.
And here's the other side of it. If you walk around with this deep-seated belief that trust should just be there.
That it should be the default setting of the universe.
Okay, that your partner, your boss, society, they just owe it to you. Then that price feels like a scam. It's insulting. You think, why should I have to pay for something that ought to be free?
And that feeling of entitlement to trust, that's the first crack in the foundation. It's the moment we choose this sort of denial over reality.
So if we feel entitled to certainty, we refuse to pay any price. Not money, not the effort of preparing for things to go wrong. But the source material is so clear on this. The tax we pay in constant nagging anxiety is almost always higher than the cost of just accepting the truth of the system we're in.
That feeling of entitlement, it stops you from ever calculating the actual value of your own peace of mind. Instead of paying an upfront cost to resolve the uncertainty, by gathering more info or making a backup plan, you choose to pay this endless mental tax on the uncertainty itself.
And that tax, that constant low-grade anxiety, is exactly what we mean when we talk about wasting your emotional resources.
It is, which brings us to the core distinction here. The reason we get so frustrated is that we keep mixing up trust and certainty. But they're fundamentally different things. They operate in completely different kinds of systems.
Okay, let's define them then. Let's start with certainty.
Right. Certainty is, it's a beautiful idea, really, almost mathematical. It's the absolute 100% assurance that an event will happen. No question.
But it only exists in closed systems, right?
Exactly. Systems where all the variables are known, fixed, and you can't have any outside interference. 2 + 2 = 4. That is a certainty. Gravity in a vacuum. That's a certainty.
Our sources use that classic example of flipping a coin. In normal conditions, you have the certainty that it will fall. You have the certainty that it will land on one of two sides, heads or tails.
It's a known, fixed outcome, as long as the conditions don't change, right? No big gusts of wind, no hidden magnets. The system is closed, so the commitment is absolute.
But then you have trust.
And trust is for the rest of us. It lives in open systems with, other people, chaotic environments, all the messy, unpredictable stuff of real life. Trust can never, ever be absolute security.
So the material defines trust as the approximation of certainty. That's the key word, isn't it? It's an approximation for events where things can and do go wrong.
Yeah. It's really just a bet. You're betting that the most probable thing will happen.
It's a prediction based on data. So when we trust a bridge, we're not certain it will hold. We're betting on the engineer's math and the observed pattern of it, not collapsing.
Precisely. And when we trust a person, we're betting on their observed pattern, their history of behavior, their competence, their commitments.
So if someone has a long track record of hitting their deadlines, doing great work, you can have high confidence. You can trust them with your next request.
It's a rational bet, a resource-savvy way to navigate a messy, open system. You're betting on their pattern of responsibility.
And this is where it all gets so painful for us. This is the crucial distinction. A person can be completely trustworthy, and we have a fantastic, observable pattern of being responsible, and still fail to do what you asked.
Because the system is open.
Right.
They could get a flat tire. A family member could have a medical emergency. Something tragic could happen. The failure here isn't a moral failure. It's a systemic one.
So the failure doesn't erase their whole pattern of being trustworthy. It just reveals the lack of certainty that's built into reality itself. They were reliable, but the world intervened. The probability bet didn't pay off this one time.
Exactly. The person who practices trust sees that and thinks, okay, risk is always there, and this time it happened. But the person who demanded certainty sees it as a personal betrayal.
Which brings us to the consequences. This is where the material gets really transformative, because our sources argue that demanding trust is maybe the most damaging thing we do to ourselves and to others.
Because it's an act of self-delusion, a profound one.
You're trying to use a social tool, trust, to override the laws of physics, the laws of chaos and risk.
Yeah, when we say, you have to trust me, or we demand it from someone else, we're really just trying to get the feeling of certainty about our reality without doing any of the work, without preparing for anything.
Let's break down how that denial works. Demanding certainty is like an emotional shortcut. We tell ourselves, if I just trust you completely, I don't have to worry, I don't have to plan, I don't have to think about what happens if you fail.
You're basically outsourcing your own risk management to someone else's moral obligation. It creates this thing we call the certainty shield.
A certainty shield. I like that.
It's a defense mechanism that completely denies reality.
Yeah.
It forces this rigid black and white view of the world where if you fail me, it must be because you're a bad person.
Right, because my demand for certainty means nothing external could possibly interfere. No accidents, no other priorities, nothing.
And think about the emotional cost of holding up that shield all the time. We think we're being efficient, saving energy, but we're actually building up this massive emotional debt.
Because if you're always demanding certainty, you have to be constantly on guard for any little thing that might violate it.
And that's where you see obsessive planning, the inability to delegate, that deep exhaustion that comes from trying to mentally guard against every single possible risk, no matter how remote.
The real irony is that the moment reality finally breaks through that shield, the moment the accident happens, the emotional collapse is just total.
Total. Because the person who demanded certainty spent zero resources on actually handling failure. All their energy went into demanding compliance from the world, not managing the consequences of it.
Exactly. That saving of resources is just a postponement, a really costly one. If the person was reliable, they probably would have succeeded anyway, without all your anxiety.
And if they failed, it was because of some unforeseen thing that your demand for subjective trust was never going to prevent in the first place.
So when we stop demanding that feeling, that certainty, and just look at the objective reality.
The only sane choice is to either observe the pattern and place your bet your trust accordingly, or put your resources into preparing for a possible failure. Either way, you're accepting and managing the reality of risk instead of fighting it.
And that is the first huge step toward real emotional control. It forces us to re-examine our own standards. Which brings us to our first reflective question. Think about the last time you were really bitterly disappointed by someone's failure. When you asked them to trust you or when you trusted them, were you really offering objective proof of reliability? Or were you maybe demanding that they give up their right to acknowledge risk and chaos? How has your own deep need for certainty kept you from preparing, practically, for the inevitable bumps in the road in your own life? So if demanding certainty is the psychological trick we use to deny reality, then our aversion to loss is the primal engine that's driving the whole thing.
Absolutely. Humanity just detests loss. It's almost on an evolutionary level. We will fight so much harder to stop something from being taken away than we will to gain something of equal value.
And this deep-seated aversion is what leads us to adopt these false ideas about reality, the ones that cause so much unnecessary suffering when the world inevitably does what it does.
The pain of losing $100 is, for most people, psychologically twice as intense as the pleasure of finding $100. It's just wired into us.
And that's why loss aversion is such a powerful tool for conditioning behavior, especially when we're young.
Yes, our sources point this out so clearly. We learn very early to fear subtraction. I mean, think about how parents try to get kids to behave. It's almost always a threat of loss.
If you don't get good grades, you won't go to the fair.
Right. The motivation isn't the reward of the grades themselves. It's the threat of losing out on the fun, the pleasure.
Or the big one. If you don't behave, Santa Claus won't bring you any gifts. We are conditioned from day one to fear that subtraction, that feeling of something being taken away because we failed.
And this conditioning teaches us two really powerful subconscious lessons. First, that loss is the ultimate consequence. And second, that if we just follow the rules, loss can be avoided entirely.
And that creates this powerful equation in our minds. Loss equals failure equals punishment.
And there's the paradox that traps us. Because while we're all conditioned to fear loss, losses themselves are just a part of reality. They're a constant input in the open system of life.
Every investment, every relationship, every single day has the risk of loss built into it.
Denying that fact is what makes the inevitable so devastating. When a loss finally happens, instead of processing it as an expected part of the system, we process it as a personal attack, a violation of the certainty we felt we were owed.
This feeling of dissatisfaction, this constant anxiety, it comes directly from that clash. The clash between reality and these two fundamental falsehoods that are just ingrained in our thinking.
Let's name them. False idea number one. Trust should exist by default. This idea that reliability shouldn't have to be earned or observed. It should just be there, a given, to make us feel safe.
And false idea number two. We normally shouldn't have losses. We treat losing money or time or an opportunity as some kind of aberration, a sign that the system is broken, or even worse, that we are broken.
And when reality smacks up against those expectations, the impact is huge. When a loss happens, we immediately jump to these subjective value judgments.
We stop analyzing the data, and we just label the reality as bad or unfair or horrible.
And that shift from objective analysis to subjective judgment, that is the machine that manufactures suffering. The objective fact is $1,000 is gone from your account. The suffering begins the moment you declare, this is a terrible, unfair thing that shouldn't have happened to me.
You don't just register the data. You feel personally victimized by reality's failure to live up to your expectation.
You're just compounding the objective loss with this self-imposed layer of suffering that has no practical purpose at all. You're throwing good emotional energy after a bad outcome.
So what's the way out?
The path out of that trap is, it's simple in theory, but it takes enormous discipline. You have to accept reality unconditionally.
That's the liberating reality check, isn't it? Losses happen. They are the price of admission for playing the game. And trust is not a natural state. It's just an observed pattern, and it's subject to change at any moment.
And the crucial action step is to recognize and distance yourself from those value judgments. When you experience loss, a failure, you have to consciously stop yourself from labeling it bad just because it happened.
Why is that label so paralyzing?
Because the moment we label something as bad, it triggers our fight or flight response. It shuts down all objective data gathering. We become emotionally reactive instead of strategically practical. We get stuck on assigning blame instead of finding a solution.
But if you remove that negative judgment,
You get immediate clarity. You switch from this defensive philosophical argument about fairness to a practical accounting problem. You stop saying, this is bad, and you can finally ask the useful questions. Okay, what data did this loss give me? How do I handle this specific problem next time? What resources do I still have?
you turn the event from a source of suffering into a source of knowledge. You move from denial, where you're stuck arguing with reality, to control, where you're actually designing your future based on new data. So once we finally accept loss as a constant possibility, not a personal failure, we can shift our energy from denial to preparation. And our sources give us two frameworks for thinking about this.
Right. The first is for a preventable loss. For risks we can actually do something about, we have to be brutally honest. First is the effort to prevent it actually worth the cost? In time, money, energy.
Cost-benefit analysis.
Exactly. Do I accept the full responsibility of not trying to prevent it, knowing I'm consciously taking that risk? And most importantly, am I basing my prevention plan only on the resources I actually have, not the ones I wish I had?
That last one is huge. Trying to prevent every possible loss, no matter how tiny, will cost you everything. The effort to prevent loss becomes a bigger loss itself.
It does. And then you have the second scenario. Inevitable loss. For things you know are going to happen, market cycles, the end of a project, aging, the death of loved ones, denial is the most wasteful strategy imaginable.
So instead you have to ask, do I know exactly how this will affect me, emotionally, practically, and how do I start preparing for it now?
And this idea of preparing for the inevitable brings us to the most powerful and maybe the most difficult concept in the source material. It's the idea of preemptive grieving.
Yeah, that personal anecdote was just stunning.
It was. The individual in the story realized that even though their parents were healthy at the time, their death was an inevitable future event. So instead of waiting for the traumatic shock, they made a conscious decision to begin the process of acceptance and grieving 10 years before their parents actually passed away.
It sounds so morbid on the surface, doesn't it? It sounds like you're just dwelling on something terrible. How is that practical?
The mechanism is psychological distance. This person separated the objective future fact, my parents will die, from the subjective, destructive suffering of being shocked by it in the moment. Over those 10 years, the grieving wasn't about feeling constant pain. It was an active, controlled process of processing their eventual absence.
So they were mentally rehearsing what the world would feel like without them, letting that reality settle in slowly over time.
Yes. They took all the energy that would have been wasted on 10 years of denial, and instead they used it to maximize the present time they had left with them.
And the outcome. That's what's so effective of this strategy.
It is. When the actual loss happened, years later, the person was able to face it with so much less suffering. The sadness was there, of course, but the crushing weight of shock, of denial, that feeling of this shouldn't be happening, that was already gone.
All the resources they saved by not fighting reality for a decade were converted into genuine peace and the ability to handle the practical side of a loss immediately.
It's the ultimate example of taking control. You prepare for the inevitable emotionally on your own terms, so you aren't paralyzed when reality finally delivers.
That changes everything about how we look at our long-term goals and our relationships. If we're terrified of the end, we can't fully enjoy the journey. So a reflective question for you here. What's one area of your life, maybe it's a financial goal, a relationship, where you hold this really rigid expectation of no loss?
Yeah.
If you accepted that loss was a real possibility, what simple practical preparation or even what preemptive grieving process could you start today to reduce your own future suffering?
We've established that the brain sees loss as just, pure subtraction, a negative entry in the ledger. So the next step to getting control is to change the math. We have to start consciously seeing a loss not just as a bad thing, but as an investment.
An investment that offers a real quantifiable return, something like wisdom or experience you couldn't get any other way.
The emotional response we have to loss is driven entirely by how we interpret it. If you see a failure as purely destructive, it paralyzes you. You get stuck in that fixed mindset where you think the outcome defines who you are.
But if you adopt this investment mindset, you start to see it as paying tuition.
Exactly. I lost 6 months of my time and $5,000, but I acquired the specific, objective knowledge that this particular market approach doesn't work right now.
So you've gained an asset, data that informs your next and hopefully more successful move.
the feeling just instantly changes because the transaction is no longer a subtraction. It's an exchange. You exchange resources for data.
This is so critical for people who are feeling dissatisfied.
Yeah.
Because the fear of failure is the #1 thing that causes inaction.
It is.
To make this more concrete, let's walk through that mugging scenario from the source material. It's a perfect little microcosm of how your interpretation creates your emotional reality.
So the setup is, a person is running late. They decide to take a shortcut and a Tahoe down a street they kind of know is a bit unsafe. They make a quick calculation that the time saved is worth the small risk.
And of course, on the shortcut, a mugger shows up, threatens them, and takes their wallet, which has $50 in it.
Now, the objective reality is fixed. An unpleasant assault happened and $50 was subtracted from their possession. But now we have two radically different ways to interpret that same event.
Let's look at interpretation A, which is the loss-focused one, the victim narrative.
Right. This person thinks, I was just assaulted, I had a horrible traumatic experience, and I lost my wallet at $50. The world is unfair and dangerous. I'm never taking a risk again.
The focus there is all on pain, on subtraction, and this kind of moral outrage. And that interpretation, it generates long-term fear, resentment, and it makes the person even more paralyzed. They learn nothing except that bad things happen.
Now let's look at interpretation B, the investment-focused one, the resource narrative. This person thinks, I just confirmed with irreversible, objective data that this specific shortcut is highly unsafe. And it only cost me a temporary scare and exactly $50 to acquire that vital piece of knowledge.
The focus shifts immediately, from loss to exchange, from victim to data analyst.
And notice the difference. In the second interpretation, the mugging actually provided quantifiable data about a tangible risk in their environment. I mean, if they had paid $50 to a security consultant who told them, don't use that street, it is 100% unsafe, they would have considered it a good deal.
Wow, yeah. The mugging provided the exact same data, just in a negative way. But the return on investment, lifelong avoidance of that dangerous street is worth way more than $50.
Exactly. The $50 wasn't lost. It was the tuition fee for an essential lesson in self-preservation.
So in the first interpretation, the person is weaker and more fearful. But in the second, they're objectively wiser. They've used the data from the loss to gain control over their future decisions.
And when we get good at reframing loss this way, as an investment, we get the clarity we need to dissolve that fear of failure that keeps us stuck.
We can actually put a number on the cost of a lesson.
Yeah.
You know, a failed presentation at work cost you 2 weeks of labor.
But that labor wasn't lost. It was payment for the knowledge of exactly which arguments fall flat with that audience or which decision makers are against your idea. That failure gave you objective data about the company's politics that you can use immediately in your next attempt.
You have to acknowledge the unpleasantness, of course, the stress, the disappointment. But you can't let that subjective feeling define the whole event as just negative. The knowledge you got has to be weighed against the price you paid.
That mindset is the absolute cornerstone of resilience. Failure isn't a final judgment on you, it's just paid tuition for your future.
It's the only way to get the truth. I mean, since that stranger with the crystal ball doesn't exist, loss is the only currency you have left to buy the truth about reality. So here's a reflective question for you. Think about a recent disappointment, professional or personal, something that really caused you frustration and pain. Can you clearly identify the specific price you paid, time, money, emotional energy, and the concrete piece of wisdom or data you gained in return? And if you can't identify the wisdom yet, what small, controlled experiment could you run to extract that value from the loss?
Now we can take all of these principles, the impossibility of certainty, the inevitability of loss, the value of objective data, and apply them to that emotional minefield of losing confidence in someone or something.
The loss of trust.
Exactly. If trust is just an approximation of certainty based on patterns, then losing trust is just. It's a necessary, objective reassessment of the probability of risk.
Trust starts to erode not because of some vague feeling, but because we observe that the pattern is changing. We have to focus on the data. Think about it. A product that was always perfect starts having quality issues. A person who used to meet 95% of their commitments suddenly starts failing 30% of the time.
Objectively, the system has changed. What was a near certain bet, a high confidence situation, suddenly has a much higher risk profile. The probability of failure has gone way up.
And trust is only truly lost when that new, higher risk level becomes unacceptable for you, when you're no longer willing to commit your resources to that bet.
Right. And we often experience this very logical, data-driven shift as a subjective betrayal. We feel hurt because our expectation of certainty was violated.
And it's so important to distinguish. I mean, sometimes it is a malicious breach of trust, but a lot of the time it's just a change in acceptable risk.
Maybe the company outsourced production to save money and the quality dropped. Maybe the reliable person is going through a personal crisis and is just objectively less reliable right now. The emotional impact is still painful, but the practical reality is just that the pattern has changed. So our approximation of certainty, our trust, has to change with it.
We have to stop operating under that illusion of certainty.
So if the pattern has changed and our high confidence is gone, what do?
We stop wasting emotional energy demanding that the old pattern come back. And instead, we develop strategies that respect the new, higher risk level.
When trust gets downgraded, the rational response is all about managing that new, elevated risk. First, you can demand objective proof and guarantees.
So you move away from simple reliance to requiring verifiable evidence before you commit your resources. If a contractor failed on the last job, you don't just take their word for it. You require detailed contracts, progress reports, things you can check.
Second, you can negotiate new terms. If you can't just walk away from the relationship, you have to acknowledge the change in confidence and adjust your expectations.
So you might say, given what's happened, my confidence is now at 60%, not 90%, so I'm reducing my commitment to you by 40% and doubling my own internal backup plan. You adjust the relationship to match the new risk level.
And third, you can just discard the option. If the new risk is unacceptable and you can't mitigate it, you make the practical choice to find an alternative that seems more reliable. You accept the loss of the original option as an investment that bought you the crucial wisdom that it's no longer a good bet.
And that brings us to the most practical, probably the most challenging part of this. Rebuilding trust, whether it's with a partner, an institution, or even with yourself after you've failed.
Trust is not an emotional gift. It's established by observing objective patterns. And once it's lost, it has to be redemonstrated with new objective patterns.
This principle just gets completely thrown out the window in personal relationships, doesn't it? Especially in toxic ones, where feelings are everything. Think about that common situation where one partner demands trust after messing up over and over.
And what's the proof they offer to reestablish that trust?
It's always subjective. I promise I'll do better. Can't you just believe in me? Or look how sorry I am. They're emotionally powerful, but they are objectively worthless for predicting future behavior.
And why does the other person so often fall for it?
Because of that deep, corrosive, false idea we talked about. Trust should exist by default. If they refuse to give that trust back, they feel like they have to spend all this energy monitoring reality. It just seems easier in the moment to give in and grant the trust than to face the high cost of acknowledging their partner's unreliability.
They give the subjective trust to avoid the emotional cost of managing the objective risk. But it's a psychological sinkhole. It costs them their peace, their energy, and eventually the relationship itself when the same failure happens again.
But it feels almost impossible to maintain that objectivity in a close relationship. I mean, if I'm constantly demanding quantifiable proof of reliability from my partner, doesn't that just become surveillance? Doesn't that undermine the intimacy?
That is the right question to ask. And we have to distinguish between surveillance and auditing. Surveillance is checking up on someone without their consent. Auditing is verifying performance against a mutually agreed upon objective standard. To really restore trust, both people have to shift the focus away from subjective feelings and intent and onto objective, measurable commitments.
So it's not about them promising not to fail again.
No, that's subjective. It's about setting objective, behavior-based agreements. So instead of, I promise I'll be better with our money, the agreement is, for the next 6 months, I will use our shared budget tracker, provide weekly expense reports every Sunday, and we will review them together.
Those are specific, countable actions.
Precisely. To truly restore trust, the focus has to be on them demonstrating that the commitment will be met through consistency and sustained, measurable effort. The new pattern of objective proof, completing the task, showing the work, has to clearly and definitively outweigh the old pattern of failure. Trust isn't restored until the data says the pattern has been rebuilt.
And that applies to everything. A company, a product, even yourself. If you want to rebuild self-trust, you have to stop accepting your own subjective promises and start demanding objective proof of consistent action from yourself. Which brings us to our final reflective question. If you're trying to rebuild trust with someone right now, or even with yourself, what specific, countable, objective proof can you offer or demand to demonstrate reliability? Forget feelings or empty promises. What does 2 weeks of consistent, demonstrable action look like? What about 2 months? Define the objective pattern that you need to see. We have covered so much ground today, really redefining the terms that control our whole emotional landscape. We've seen that demanding certainty is this costly illusion that just drains our energy.
And that demanding default trust is often just a very sophisticated way of denying the risks that are inherent in reality.
By consciously accepting loss as an inevitable part of life, you free up so many mental resources that were being wasted on anxiety and denial and resentment.
And that acceptance lets you reframe loss. It's no longer a destructive personal attack. It's a necessary investment that buys you invaluable, quantifiable wisdom and experience.
So we encourage you to move from passive hope, just hoping reality will bend to your will, to active observation. Trust is earned through objective patterns, and loss is just the cost of learning the truth about those patterns.
Use the insights from this deep dive to stop judging reality for being messy and start preparing for it to be exactly what it is. Wonderfully, beautifully uncertain, but manageable once you accept the risk.
A really powerful and immediate change can start just by challenging those deep-seated false ideas. If you can simply accept that loss is possible and that trust is not the default,
you empower yourself to make objective, resource-savvy decisions about risk, and that leads to so much less anxiety and so much more genuine control.
Don't simply take our word. Put everything you heard here to the test. Make this knowledge truly yours. We invite you to share your ideas, your thoughts, and your experiences in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this deep dive or found it useful, please like the podcast and subscribe to learn more about similar topics. Remember, the power is yours.
I built my castles on the shoreline, watched the tide come rolling in. Never thought the waves would reach me till the water touched my skin. And it hurts, yes it hurts, when everything you know dissolves. Sometimes you lose to win. That's how the lesson begins. The heart is true sinking when you're stuttering again. Trust isn't certain, it's a gamble, a risk we take with open hands. What feels like failure in the moment might be the chance to understand. And it burns, yes it burns, when bridges fall.